Think of the absolute calmest, most polite person in your life.
Oh, I think we all have someone like that in mind immediately.
Right, the one who never, ever raises their voice.
Never.
The person you would probably point to and say, now that is someone with incredible emotional intelligence.
Yeah, the perfectly zen friend.
Exactly, you have them in your head. Well, what if I told you that the person you're picturing might not be emotionally intelligent at all?
Which sounds completely backwards, I know.
It really does. But what if, beneath that perfectly placid surface, they are entirely emotionally illiterate, and their body is actually treating that forced, rigid calmness as a toxic, slow-acting poison?
It just completely shatters our cultural assumptions, doesn't it? I mean, we have this deeply ingrained tendency to equate emotional control with emotional suppression.
We really do.
We assume that if a person isn't visibly angry or visibly upset, everything internally must be perfectly fine.
Right, like they've just conquered their feelings.
Exactly. But when we look at the actual neuroscience, we see that true emotional intelligence has absolutely nothing to do with being an unfeeling, robotic peacemaker. It has everything to do with being deeply, consciously, and sometimes very uncomfortably human.
I love looking at it through that lens because it completely shifts the paradigm of what it actually means to be successful. So, welcome to a brand new deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in the fascinating, complex, and honestly incredibly high-stakes world of emotional intelligence, what we often just refer to as EQ.
Yeah, EQ.
And we're drawing on foundational texts in psychology today, particularly Daniel Goleman's paradigm-shifting work, alongside some really incredible behavioral science and neurobiology. We really want to figure out what is happening inside our heads when we feel things.
And the materials we're synthesizing today are so vital because they finally bridge that gap between hard neuroscience and everyday human behavior.
Which is a gap we've ignored for a long time.
A very long time. For the longest time, the scientific community and just society at large really treated emotions as this messy, irrational byproduct of being human.
Like a glitch in the system.
Exactly. Emotions were seen as something to be conquered. You had to overcome them with cold, hard logic.
Right.
But the research completely flips that script. It demonstrates that our emotions actually possess their own distinct logic. They have their own complex architecture and a really critical evolutionary purpose that we ignore at our own peril.
And our mission for this deep dive is to deconstruct all of that. We are going to explore what EQ actually is and why it consistently dictates a person's career success, their physical health, and their overall happiness way more accurately than a traditional IQ score ever could.
Way more accurately, it's not even close.
And most importantly, we aren't just going to leave you with abstract theory here. We're going to map out the physical mechanics of emotion in your brain and give you concrete, actionable ways to upgrade your own emotional toolkit.
Because the best news of all is that, unlike some traits, this is a skill. It's something you can actively learn and improve.
Which is just so relieving.
It is. It's perhaps the most liberating finding in modern psychology. So much of the trajectory of our lives is determined by how we handle our internal emotional weather.
Yes, our internal weather. I like that.
Knowing that we have the power to navigate that weather rather than just being victims of the storm is a total game changer. It's a lifelong active practice, sure, but it is entirely within our control.
So let's start by looking at how we've traditionally measured human potential, because for over a century now, society has been completely obsessed with the intelligence quotient, or IQ.
Obsessed is the right word.
We build our entire educational systems around it. We test it constantly in schools.
Oh yeah, standardized testing everywhere.
We use it to filter university admissions. We use it in corporate hiring. We've essentially treated IQ as this immutable destiny.
Right. The cultural narrative is basically, if you are born with a high IQ, you are on a glide path to greatness.
And if you aren't, well, you're going to hit a ceiling pretty quickly. But the sources point out a massive, glaring flaw in this exact type of thinking.
A monumental flaw, honestly. When we talk about IQ, we are primarily measuring cognitive abilities. So things like spatial reasoning, mathematical logic, pattern recognition.
Language acquisition, stuff like that.
Exactly. And the broad consensus in psychometrics is that your cognitive IQ is relatively fixed from a fairly young age. It stabilizes early.
Okay, so it doesn't change much.
Right. But if cognitive processing power is the ultimate and only true predictor of success, we run into a major statistical problem.
Which is what?
Well, how do we explain the brilliant software engineer with an off-the-charts IQ who completely alienates every single person on their team.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The person who cannot handle critical feedback and just ends up professionally isolated.
We've all worked with that person.
We have. Or, looking at the other side of the coin, how do we explain the person with a perfectly average IQ who manages to build these incredible, loyal teams?
The ones who navigate complex corporate hierarchies with total ease.
Yes. And they achieve massive, sustained success. How does IQ explain that?
It doesn't. We've all seen this in our own lives. The smartest person in the room is very rarely the most effective person in the room.
Yeah.
There is clearly a missing variable in the equation here.
And that missing variable is the emotional quotient, the EQ. It is the gap between cognitive capability and actual real-world navigation.
Okay.
And the key distinction, the thing that makes EQ so wildly vital, is that it is highly adaptable. It's malleable.
Unlike IQ.
Exactly. It's a set of specific competencies that can be cultivated, practiced, and improved at literally any stage of your life.
So we really need to define what those competencies actually are. Because emotional intelligence is a term that gets thrown around in corporate seminars a lot.
Right.
And it can sound a bit vague or fluffy, you know.
It definitely gets watered down in the corporate world.
Right. But our sources break the architecture of EQ down into 5 distinct pillars, which gives us a really solid framework. The first one, which seems to be the foundation for everything else, is self-awareness.
Yes.
But just to clarify, we aren't talking about self-awareness in the philosophical, what is my purpose in the universe sense.
Not at all. No.
Right.
We are talking about acute, real-time physiological and psychological awareness.
Okay. What does that look like?
It is the ability to know what you are feeling at the exact microsecond you are feeling it. It's recognizing a shift in your internal state before it fully hijacks your behavior.
So for you listening, imagine you are sitting in a tense meeting and someone questions your work.
A classic scenario.
Right. Self-awareness is noticing that your jaw is suddenly clenching, your breathing has become shallow, maybe your heart is beating faster.
Yes, all those physical cues.
And having the cognitive presence to say to yourself, oh, I am feeling threatened and defensive right now.
Which sounds incredibly simple in theory, right? But in practice, it is remarkably difficult. Most of us are completely swept away by the current of an emotion before we even realize we are in the river.
We just react, we get defensive, we snap back, or we withdraw.
Exactly. And the second pillar builds entirely on whether or not you can achieve that first pillar. The second one is self-regulation.
Self-regulation.
Right. Once you have the self-awareness to identify the emotion in real time, the question becomes, can you manage it?
You soothe your own nervous system, basically?
Precisely. Can you shake off rampant anxiety, profound gloom, or sudden irritability, rather than letting those feelings dictate what you actually do next?
Wait, I'm getting stuck on this idea of self-regulation because this brings me right back to our opening thought experiment.
The really calm person.
Yeah. I think a lot of people misinterpret managing an emotion as simply hiding an emotion.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if I'm sitting in that meeting and I am absolutely furious at my boss and I just plaster a fake calm smile on my face and pretend everything is fine. Yeah. Isn't that just bottling it up?
Yes, it is.
That sounds incredibly unhealthy.
Yeah.
Is that what true self-regulation is?
I am so glad you brought that up because that is the single most dangerous misconception about EQ.
Really?
Yes. What you just described, plastering on a fake smile while you are furious, is suppression. It is bottling it up. And the texts we're examining highlight just how biologically destructive that is.
Biologically destructive.
Completely. When you look at clinical studies of people who constantly suppress their emotions, people who claim they aren't angry, and show absolutely no outward facial expressions of distress, their internal physiology tells a completely different story.
So their bodies are basically screaming while their faces are completely silent.
Precisely. If researchers hook these individuals up to physiological monitors during a stressful event, their heart rates are skyrocketing. Their blood pressure is pushing into dangerous territory. Their nervous system is triggering a massive toxic stress response, and it's flooding their bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline.
But because they are suppressing the outward expression, all of that physiological energy is just trapped inside the body.
Yes. They are essentially marinating their own internal organs in stress hormones.
Oh my God, that doesn't sound like emotional intelligence at all. That sounds like a fast track to cardiovascular disease.
It absolutely is. True self-regulation is the exact opposite of suppression.
Okay, so what is it then?
Self-regulation is about organically processing the emotion. It's having an internal dialogue that says, I am incredibly angry right now, and my anger is entirely valid given the situation.
Validating your own feelings.
Right. And then asking, however, how can I express this anger in a way that is constructive rather than destructive to my goals?
Ah, I see.
It's about letting the emotion move through you, understanding its data, and then choosing a response, rather than burying the feeling alive or blindly reacting to it.
That distinction changes everything. It means you are absolutely allowed to feel the anger. You just aren't allowed to let the anger drive the car.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so pillar 1 is self-awareness. Pillar 2 is self-regulation. We've mastered the internal dashboard. Where does the architecture go next?
The third pillar is motivation, specifically emotional motivation.
Like being motivated to do your laundry.
No, this goes way beyond just wanting to achieve a goal. It is the ability to marshal your complex emotional states and channel them toward an objective.
Okay.
It involves delaying gratification, stifling impulsiveness, and maintaining a state of psychological flow. It's the capacity to use your emotional energy as fuel to persist, even when you are incredibly frustrated, fatigued, or facing a major setback.
So the difference between experiencing a failure and letting the emotion of disappointment just crush you into giving up.
Right.
Versus feeling that exact same disappointment and transmuting it into a fierce determination to try again.
Exactly. It's like an internal emotional alchemy. Now, those first three pillars, awareness, regulation, motivation, those are entirely focused on the self.
Okay.
The final two pillars shift the focus outward to how we interact with the rest of humanity. Pillar 4 is empathy.
Empathy.
Yeah. If self-awareness is the ability to read your own internal dashboard, empathy is the ability to read the dashboard of the people around you.
That makes sense.
It's understanding the emotional makeup of other people, picking up on the subtle, often unspoken social signals that indicate what others need or what they want or what they fear.
So if empathy is reading someone else's emotional dashboard and gathering all that social data, it seems like the final step. The fifth pillar is actually taking that data and doing something with it.
You hit the nail on the head. The fifth pillar is social skills. This is the culmination of the entire architecture.
Putting it all together.
Right. It is the ability to manage relationships, build rapport, navigate complex conflicts, and inspire or influence others. You are taking your self-awareness, your ability to regulate yourself, and your deep empathy for others, and you are synthesizing all of that to interact smoothly and effectively within a social environment.
I really appreciate how sequential that is. It just makes logical sense. You cannot possibly have highly effective social skills if you don't have empathy.
No, you just be manipulating people blindly.
Right. And you can't have true empathy if you lack self-awareness because you won't even understand your own feelings, let alone someone else's. It's a completely interconnected system.
It is.
And what's deeply encouraging for anyone listening is the underlying neuroscience here. If you are listening to this and thinking, wow, I am an absolute disaster at self-regulation, you aren't doomed.
Not at all.
This isn't like finding out you are permanently bad at spelling or something.
Exactly. The entire concept of EQ rests on the biological reality of neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity.
Yes. The brain is not a static organ. The neural pathways that govern your emotional responses can actually be rewired. When you practice these pillars, you are literally creating new synaptic connections.
You're changing the physical brain.
You are. You're strengthening the myelin sheath around those pathways, making new, healthier emotional responses faster and more automatic over time. You are building structural changes in your brain.
Okay, but that raises a massive fundamental question for me.
Go for it.
If our brains are capable of this, and if EQ is so crucial to our physical survival and our societal success, why is it so hard?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why do our emotions so often completely betray us in the first place? Why do we fly off the handle at our partners over something totally trivial?
Right.
Or absolutely freeze in terror during a public speaking event?
Or send a terrible text.
Yes, or hit send on that catastrophic, rage-filled email at 2 in the morning.
If we are such advanced logical creatures, why are we constantly fighting our own feelings?
Well, to understand that, the texts tell us we have to look backward. Way backward. Like history.
Evolutionary history. We have to examine the evolutionary purpose and the modern pitfalls of human passion. We have to look at the literal physical architecture of the human brain. because the chronological order in which our brain evolved explains everything about why we act the way we do.
This is where the biological mechanics get really fascinating. Because the sources detail how emotions didn't just evolve to make life interesting, right?
Right.
They evolved to guide early humans through high-stakes scenarios where intellectual analysis alone is simply too slow or completely insufficient. Like, if you are an early hominid facing a sudden lethal danger and you stop to oncologically calculate your options, you're going to be eaten.
You're dead. We have to visualize how the brain is built in layers, almost like an archaeological site.
Okay, paint a picture for us.
At the very base, sitting right on top of the spinal cord, you have the brainstem. This is the most primitive part. It handles purely automatic, life-sustaining functions like breathing and your heart rate.
The autopilot?
Exactly. Now, sitting directly on top of that is the limbic system, which is the emotional center of the brain. This is where fear, rage, joy, and the biological drive to nurture actually live.
Okay.
And then wrapping around all of that, like a deeply folded cap, is the neocortex. This is the newest part of the brain. It's the rational, thinking, logical, analytical center.
So we have the stem, the emotional center, and then the logical center on top.
Right. And the crucial thing to understand is the timeline here. The emotional limbic system evolved millions of years before the rational neocortex.
Wow. So our emotional responses are literally an older, more deeply entrenched operating system.
Yes. And because they are older, and because they are physically located closer to the brainstem where sensory input first arrives, they have priority access.
Get the information first.
They do. When you see, hear, or feel something, those sensory signals travel up into the brain, and they hit the emotional center before they fully reach the rational center.
So the emotional brain gets the data first, and it acts faster than the rational brain. The texts share two incredibly vivid stories that perfectly illustrate the overwhelming power of this evolutionary shortcut. One is a story of profound, beautiful sacrifice, and the other is an absolute tragedy.
Yes, the Chauncey story and the Crabtree story.
Right. Let's look at the beautiful one first, because it perfectly captures why logic sometimes has to take a backseat to emotion just for the survival of our species.
It's the story of Gary and Mary Jane Chauncey, and it is a profound example of how intense emotion completely overrides logical self-preservation.
So the Chaunceys were on a passenger train traveling through Louisiana, and their 11-year-old daughter, Andrea, was traveling with them. It's really important to note that Andrea had cerebral palsy, she was confined to a wheelchair, and had very limited physical mobility.
Right.
Without any warning, the train derails. It careens violently off the tracks and plunges straight into a bayou, sinking into the deep, muddy river. The train car begins filling with water instantly. It is a chaotic, terrifying scenario. Now, if you are a purely rational, logical creature, if your analytical neocortex is running the show, your biological survival instinct is making a very cold calculation.
Pure math.
Right. The logic dictates that saving a physically disabled child in a rapidly sinking train car filled with panicked people is a statistical near impossibility, and attempting it will almost certainly result in your own drowning. The pure logic says, get out, save yourself.
A purely self-interested cognitive intellect calculates those odds and abandons the child to preserve its own life.
But that is not what Gary and Mary Jane Chauncey did. Without a single second of hesitation, as the water rapidly rose to the ceiling of the train car, they focused entirely on their daughter.
They didn't even pause.
They fought through the water and the debris, and they managed to physically push Andrea through a broken window to rescue workers who were outside on boats. They saved her life.
It's amazing.
It is. But in doing so, they ran out of time. They sacrificed their own lives. They both drowned in that submerged train car. The emotion of altruistic, fiercely protective parental love completely and instantaneously overrode their basic biological drive for self-preservation.
It did. And from a cold evolutionary standpoint, biologists refer to this as the drive for reproductive success, sacrificing the individual self to ensure the survival of your genetic lineage in the next generation.
Right, ensuring the genes survive.
But to those parents in that exact moment, there was no calculation taking place. It was the pure, unadulterated, overwhelming power of love. The emotional brain seized complete control of their bodies, because if it had paused to let the rational brain weigh the pros and cons, the child would have died.
The emotion provided an immediate, forceful, physical directive to act.
Exactly.
It's a heartbreaking story, but it illustrates so clearly how our emotions are fundamentally designed to guarantee survival in extreme split-second moments. But, and this is the massive biological catch here,
The dark side of it.
Right. That exact same evolutionary shortcut, that exact same high-speed emotional bypass that allows for heroic parental love can also lead to devastating, irreversible tragedy in our modern lives. The sources contrast the Chauncey's heroism with the heartbreaking tragedy of the Crabtree family.
This second story illustrates exactly what happens when the emotional brain's incredible speed becomes a fatal flaw in an environment it wasn't originally designed for.
Right. So it was a completely normal evening. A 14-year-old girl named Matilda Crabtree decided to play a practical joke on her parents. She told them she was going to sleep over at a friend's house, but instead, she sneaked back home and hid in a closet in her bedroom.
Just a standard teenage prank.
Exactly. She wanted to jump out and scare them when they got home late. Her father, Bobby Crabtree, and his wife arrived home. They fully believed the house was empty. Then, Bobby heard a sudden, unexpected noise coming from upstairs.
Let's pause the narrative here and look at the exact mechanical processes happening in the brain.
Okay, what's happening?
A sudden, unexplained noise in a supposedly empty, dark house immediately triggers the amygdala.
The amygdala.
Yes, the amygdala is an almond-shaped cluster of neurons deep in the limbic system, and it acts as the brain's alarm bell.
Okay.
The amygdala does not do nuance, it does not do careful analysis, it does not wait for the rational neocortex to analyze the acoustic properties of the sound to determine if it was a footstep or just the house settling.
It just fires.
It instantly triggers a massive systemic cascade of neurochemicals. It hijacks the central nervous system, preparing the body for immediate fight or flight.
So Bobby Crabtree, whose brain is now entirely flooded with fear and adrenaline, reacting purely out of this evolutionary survival mechanism, grabbed a pistol he kept for protection.
He was in total fight mode.
He walked into Matilda's dark room to investigate. Matilda jumped out of her hiding place and yelled, "Boo!" And in a fraction of a millisecond before his rational brain could recognize the shape of his own daughter, before his eyes could even fully process the visual information, send it to the visual cortex, and route it to the thinking brain to say, "Stop, that's Matilda."
The amygdala commanded his finger to pull the trigger.
He shot his own daughter in the neck. She died 12 hours later.
It is just the ultimate nightmare scenario, and in neurology, it is the classic textbook example of an amygdala hijack.
Amygdala hijack.
Yes, the emotional response was so extraordinarily fast and so biochemically overwhelming that it completely bypassed the thinking brain.
Because it had to, right, from an evolutionary standpoint.
Right. In the prehistoric world, this exact hair trigger reaction to a sudden noise or movement kept our ancestors alive against apex predators. If there was a rustle in the tall grass, the early humans who reacted with instant unthinking fear and ran away lived.
And the ones who stopped to logically analyze whether the rustle was a tiger or just the wind got eaten.
Precisely. Our ancestors are the ones who ran. We inherited their nervous systems.
So what does this mean for us today, living in a world where the rustle in the grass is rarely a tiger, but usually just an unexpected email or a loud noise?
It means we are walking around in a highly complex, modern, socially intricate society, but we are equipped with an alarm system designed for the Pleistocene era.
We have prehistoric hardware.
Exactly. We have these powerful, evolutionary, emotional triggers that we literally cannot turn off. The hardware is hardwired. Sensory data will always hit the amygdala before it hits the neocortex. We are biologically destined to react emotionally before we can think rationally.
Which means every single one of us is susceptible to making terrible decisions, saying awful things, or acting destructively in the heat of the moment.
Every single one of us.
And since we can't just surgically uninstall this older operating system, what is the solution? Are we just at the mercy of our neurochemistry?
No. The only solution lies in mastering the first and second pillars of EQ. Self-awareness and self-regulation.
Back to the pillars.
Right. If you cannot physically stop the initial amygdala trigger from firing, your only defense is to become acutely highly aware of it the moment it happens. You have to train your mind to recognize the physiological signs of an emotional hijack so you can intentionally engage the rational brain and pump the brakes before you act on the impulse.
Which transitions us perfectly into mastering our internal landscape. Let's look at the inner game. If you want to navigate the external world without causing collateral damage, you have to master your internal weather first.
Absolutely.
And to illustrate how we break the circuit of an emotional hijack, the sources share a classic Japanese Zen tale. I absolutely love this story because it perfectly captures that exact microsecond where the rational brain regains control.
It's a wonderful parable about the physical sensation of moving from an amygdala hijack back into conscious awareness.
So the story goes like this. An aggressive, prideful, battle-hardened samurai approaches a peaceful, contemplative Zen master. The samurai, expecting deference, demands, "Explain to me the concepts of heaven and hell."
And what does the master do?
The Zen master looks up at the samurai with complete and utter disdain and says, "You are a coarse, stupid, ugly man. I will not waste my time explaining anything to someone as ignorant as you."
Now, notice what the master is doing here. He is intentionally, deliberately triggering the samurai's emotional brain.
Right.
He is launching a direct attack on the samurai's ego and honor to provoke an amygdala hijack.
And it works instantly.
Yeah.
The samurai is completely enraged. His honor has been insulted. His amygdala fires, flooding his system with adrenaline. He draws his sword, fully intending to strike the master dead right there, and screams, "I could kill you for your impertinence."
Total limbic takeover.
But the Zen master doesn't flinch. He doesn't back away. He just looks calmly at the drawn sword, points to it, and says softly, "That is hell."
And right there, in that exact moment, the neural circuit breaks.
The samurai is struck by the profound, undeniable truth of what the master just said. He realizes in a flash of pure self-awareness that his anger, his complete lack of control, his absolute surrender to his rage, that is hell.
Yes, he has been entirely captured by his own emotion.
And in that moment of sudden, intense self-awareness, the physiological storm breaks. The neocortex comes back online, he calms down, he realizes what he was about to do, sheathes his sword, bows in deep gratitude, and thanks the master for the profound lesson. And the Zen master smiles and says, "And that is heaven."
That is heaven. The profound psychological truth here is that the awareness of the emotion frees you from the tyranny of the emotion.
Right.
When the samurai was blind with rage, when he was just acting on the impulse, he was a slave to his amygdala. The moment he observed his own rage, the moment he stepped outside of it and recognized it for what it was, he regained his autonomy.
Let's bring this out of ancient Japan and connect it directly to the modern lives of anyone listening. The sources offer a very relatable scenario to bridge this gap, and I think we've all been the samurai in this situation.
Oh, without a doubt.
Picture yourself at work. You are collaborating on a massive, high-stakes group project. You have a coworker who is consistently late delivering their part of the work, and the deadline is looming. You are absolutely furious.
The stress is high.
Right. You are sitting at your desk, furiously typing out an email to them, and it is cold, it is harsh, it is aggressive. You are the samurai, and your keyboard is your drawn sword.
Your limbic system is entirely driving your behavior in that moment. You are preparing to attack.
Right. But then right before you hit send, you force a moment of self-awareness. You pause, take your hands off the keyboard, step back, and ask yourself, wait, why am I so fiercely, overwhelmingly angry about this?
You check the dashboard.
Exactly. And when you force yourself to sit with that physiological feeling for just a second, you realize something really surprising. You aren't actually angry at the coworker's time management. You are terrified.
A fear instead of anger.
Yeah. You realize that your intense anger is actually just a mask for fear. The deep-seated fear that if this project fails, you are going to look incompetent to your boss, your reputation will suffer, and maybe your job security is at risk.
What's fascinating about human neurobiology is the deeply layered, complex nature of our emotional states. We very rarely experience just one pure, isolated emotion.
It's usually a mix.
Always. Anger, in particular, is very frequently a secondary emotion. It acts as the armor we wear, a defensive posture we take, to protect ourselves from a much more vulnerable primary emotion, like profound fear, deep sadness, or acute shame.
It is just so much easier to feel angry than it is to feel scared.
It feels powerful, whereas fear feels weak.
But having that realization changes everything about how you handle the situation. If you continue to operate blindly from the secondary emotion of anger, you hit send on that harsh email.
And you cause a massive conflict.
Right. You alienate the coworker, they get defensive, the collaboration breaks down entirely, and the project probably fails anyway because now you're at war with each other.
Self-sabotage.
But if you operate from the awareness of your primary emotion, your fear, your entire behavioral approach shifts. You sheathe the sword. You might approach the coworker, perhaps in person or on a call, and say, "Hey, I have to admit, I'm feeling really anxious and stressed about our upcoming deadline because I really want us to look good to the leadership team. What's going on your end, and how can we get this fixed together?"
You've moved from hell to heaven. You've de-escalated the situation internally and externally simply by correctly naming the true underlying emotion. And that brings up one of the most powerful, actionable strategies discussed in the research for building this exact skill, developing what psychologists call emotional granularity.
Emotional granularity. I want to spend some time on this because when I read about this concept, it felt like discovering a superpower I didn't know existed. Walk us through how this works mechanically in the brain.
It truly is a cognitive superpower. Emotional granularity is the ability to use highly precise, nuanced vocabulary to describe exactly what you are feeling. The problem is that most people walk around with a very blunt, impoverished emotional vocabulary. If you ask them how they feel, they will use massive, generic umbrella terms. They say, I feel bad, or I feel good, or I'm stressed, or I'm mad.
Guilty as charged.
But from a neurological standpoint, a word like bad is useless information. It doesn't give your brain any actionable data on how to solve the underlying problem.
It's like walking into an emergency room telling the doctor, I feel sick, and then absolutely refusing to explain if the pain is in your head, your stomach, or your foot.
Exactly.
The doctor can't treat you if you don't give them specific data.
That is a perfect analogy. If you can look inward and say, I don't just feel bad, I feel profoundly disillusioned, or I feel socially marginalized, or I feel a very specific kind of grief mixed with nostalgia.
Being really, really specific.
Yes. The moment you apply a highly specific, granular linguistic label to an internal physiological state, something incredible happens in your brain. You actively engage the language centers, which are located in the rational neocortex.
Okay, the thinking brain.
Right. By searching for the exact right word, you literally pull neural energy and blood flow away from the emotional limbic system and up into the analytical thinking brain. The very act of precisely naming the emotion begins to regulate and dampen the emotion.
That blows my mind. The research is saying that just having a larger emotional vocabulary actually physically calms your nervous system down.
Yes. There is a direct linguistic neural connection. The sources detail extensive research into families of emotion. Take anger, for example. Anger is a family. But within that family, there are vastly different shades. Are you slightly annoyed? Are you frustrated? Are you indignant? Are you absolutely furious?
Or take fear. Are you mildly apprehensive? Are you nervous? Are you terrified? Are you experiencing existential dread?
Finding the exact shade gives your brain the blueprint for how to handle it. Precision is neurological power.
And if you are struggling to find that precise word in the heat of the moment, because, let's be honest, when you're hijacked, your vocabulary tends to shrink. The sources advocate for a very simple physical mechanism to force the rational brain back online so you can find the word. They call it the 10-second pause.
It sounds almost too simplistic to be effective, like a cliche you'd read on a motivational poster, but it is deeply, fundamentally rooted in the physics of the brain.
Because as we established, the emotional brain processes data faster, right? The low road to the amygdala is shorter.
Yes, milliseconds faster.
So when you read a deeply triggering passive-aggressive email from a colleague or someone makes a snide comment to you in a meeting, your amygdala reacts in milliseconds. You feel an overwhelming, almost physical urge to snap back instantly.
We all know that feeling.
But if you literally force yourself, no matter how hard it is, to wait just 10 seconds before you open your mouth, before you start typing, you are manipulating your own biology.
You're buying time.
You are literally giving the electrical signals in your brain enough time to travel the longer physical distance up to the prefrontal cortex. You are giving your rational thinking brain time to catch up, analyze the situation, and say, hold on, let's think about the long-term consequences of calling our boss an idiot.
You are intentionally creating a temporal gap between the stimulus and your response. And as Viktor Frankl famously noted, in that gap lies your freedom and your growth.
I absolutely love that concept. Okay, so we firmly established the mechanics of the inner game. You understand neuroplasticity, you learn to force the pause, you develop the vocabulary to name your feelings with granularity, and you learn to manage your own internal weather.
Right, the internal dashboard.
But humans are profoundly social creatures. We don't live in a vacuum. We have to interact with a complex web of other people every single day. And that brings us to the outer game. Empathy and social contagion. Once you master your internal landscape, how do you project that outward?
You project it outward through the mechanism of empathy. And the texts make a very bold but heavily supported philosophical and scientific claim here. Empathy is the foundational building block of human morality.
The building block of morality.
Yes. Without the capacity for empathy, the entire social contract that holds humanity together completely collapses.
And to prove just how essential it is, the sources ask us to look at the darkest corners of human psychology. They ask us to look at what happens when empathy is completely biologically absent. They examine the extreme deficit.
They look at the minds of sociopaths, psychopaths, and chronic abusers.
It is a chilling but necessary exploration. When you study individuals who commit heinous, violent crimes, or individuals who routinely, systematically abuse the people around them, the one unifying psychological characteristic is a profound, terrifying lack of empathy.
They are entirely incapable of experiencing or conceptualizing the pain of their victims.
And the really shocking part is that the sources point out this isn't just a behavioral choice or a moral failing. They point to actual empirical brainwave studies showing that this is a measurable neurological deficit.
Yes, and this goes back to what we were just discussing about the connection between language and emotion.
Right.
In a neurologically typical individual, the brain processes emotionally charged words vastly differently than it processes neutral everyday words. If I sit you in a lab and flash the word chair on a screen, your brain registers it neutrally.
Obviously.
But if I flash a highly charged word like kill or torture, your brain waves, measured by an EEG, will show a distinct, sharp spike in activity in the emotional centers. Your brain recognizes that the word carries heavy emotional weight.
But when researchers run those exact same brainwave studies on people who exhibit strong psychopathic traits,
they see absolutely nothing. A complete flatline. Their brains literally do not register emotional words any differently than neutral words. From a neurological processing standpoint, the word kill produces the exact same flat brainwave as the word chair.
That's terrifying.
There is a complete structural disconnect between the language processing center of their brain and the emotional limbic center. They know what the words mean intellectually, they can define them in a dictionary, but they feel absolutely nothing associated with them.
Which explains how they can rationalize the most horrifying actions imaginable, because the internal emotional braking system is just missing.
Exactly.
The empathy that makes a normal person wince or feel sick to their stomach when they see someone else in physical or emotional pain just doesn't exist for them. It really proves the point that true morality isn't just about memorizing a list of rules. It's about physically feeling a connection to the well-being of others.
And this invisible neurological connection works in both directions. Just as the complete absence of empathy creates darkness and destruction, the presence of strong, regulated, powerful emotion can literally alter the physical and psychological environment of an entire group of people.
Which brings us to the fascinating phenomenon of emotional contagion.
Yes, emotional contagion.
I find this concept so interesting. We are constantly transmitting our internal emotional states, and we are constantly receiving the emotional signals of others, almost like biological Wi-Fi routers.
I love that analogy, biological Wi-Fi.
We leak our emotions through our posture, our tone, our micro-expressions, and the sources share this unbelievable real-world story to demonstrate just how incredibly powerful this contagion can be, even in the most extreme circumstances. It's a story from a Vietnam War veteran named David Bush.
It is perhaps the most stunning cinematic illustration of social contagion you could possibly find, set in an environment of maximum chaos.
So Bush was deployed in Vietnam, and his unit was caught in the middle of a fierce, chaotic, incredibly violent firefight. There are billets flying everywhere, explosions, screaming, total terror. The amygdalas of every single soldier on that battlefield are firing at maximum capacity.
Absolute panic.
Suddenly, right in the middle of this horrific scene, a line of 6 Buddhist monks appears.
Just walking out of nowhere.
They are walking in a perfectly straight line, directly across the line of fire, right through the middle of the battlefield. And they are completely, utterly, impenetrably calm. They aren't running, they aren't ducking, they aren't even looking frantically left or right. They are just walking with this profound, centered tranquility.
And the effect they have on the soldiers is immediate and measurable.
Bush reported that their calmness was so powerful, so radiant and absolute, that it acted as a literal physical contagion. The soldiers on both sides of the conflict, the Americans and the Viet Cong, felt this overwhelming wave of tranquility wash over them.
It's hard to even imagine.
And they stopped fighting. Everyone just lowered their weapons and stopped shooting. Bush said he completely lost the will to fight in that moment, and so did everyone else.
Wow.
The monks didn't utter a single word. They didn't preach. Their internal, regulated, emotional state was so grounded and so powerful that it neurologically infected hundreds of terrified men and stopped a battle.
To understand the biology of what happened there, we have to talk about mirror neurons.
Mirror neurons, what are those?
These are specialized cells in the brain that fire both when we act and when we observe someone else performing the same action. They are the hardware for empathy. When those soldiers, whose nervous systems were redlining with fear, observed the monks' profound calmness, their mirror neurons began to simulate that calmness internally.
So their brains literally copied the monks' brains.
The emotional state of the monks synchronized the nervous systems of everyone around them. It proves a fundamental rule of social dynamics. The person in the room with the most intense, grounded emotional state, whether that is sheer panic, explosive rage, or profound calm, will almost always dictate the emotional state of everyone else in that room.
Which is exactly why the skill we call reading the room is so utterly critical for success. You have to be able to actively use your empathy to sense the emotional atmosphere before you speak, act, or try to lead.
Exactly. Reading the room is simply applied empathy. It's walking into a boardroom, scanning the micro-expressions and body language of your colleagues, sensing that the collective energy is incredibly tense and anxious, and consciously adjusting your communication style to de-escalate that tension rather than blindly pushing your agenda.
Or walking into your home, sensing that your partner is exhausted and frustrated before they even take off their coat, and altering your behavior to meet them where they are.
Let's actually pivot and talk about partners for a minute.
Let's do it.
Because the sources dive into relationship pitfalls, and I have to confess, I saw myself completely exposed in this part of the reading. It details the classic disastrous error of the problem solver.
Oh, absolutely. It is an incredibly common dynamic, and it represents a massive failure of social empathy, even when the intentions are entirely positive.
Right. The scenario is so common. Your partner comes home from work, they are visibly upset, they drop their bags, and they start venting about a terrible, unfair situation that happened at the office.
We've all been there.
And immediately, my brain, wanting to be helpful, goes into full analytical overdrive. I listen for 2 minutes, and then I say, okay, I see the issue. Here is the logical solution. You need to do A, B, and C tomorrow, and the problem is fixed.
And I'm guessing that doesn't go over well.
Not at all. Instead of being relieved and grateful for my brilliant advice, my partner gets even more upset, they feel dismissed, and suddenly we are in a massive fight about how I never listen.
And you are completely baffled as to why they are angry, because in your mind, you just offered a solution. But the failure here is a failure to validate the emotion before attempting to solve the problem.
Validation is key.
It is the absolute cornerstone of empathetic connection. When your partner comes home in an elevated emotional state, their limbic system is highly active. They're experiencing distress. In that moment, they are not looking for a rational, neocortex-driven action plan.
No, they want connection.
Exactly. They're looking for emotional connection. They want to know that you understand their pain, that you see it, and that their feelings are justified. By instantly jumping to a logistical solution, you are essentially invalidating their emotional experience. You are implicitly saying, your feelings are a problem to be fixed, so stop feeling bad and just execute this plan.
Which makes them feel completely unheard, isolated, and frankly foolish for being upset in the first place. The sources really emphasize that people process emotions in fundamentally different ways.
Oh, definitely.
Some people process by externalizing. They need to talk it out immediately to make sense of it. Other people process by internalizing. When they are stressed, they need to retreat to a quiet space, be alone, and sit with it before they can even articulate what's wrong.
And expecting your partner to process their stress exactly the way you process yours is a massive failure of empathy.
It is the arrogant assumption that your internal psychological reality is the only valid reality. High EQ in a relationship requires the self-awareness and empathy to recognize, okay, my partner withdraws when they are stressed, whereas I pursue connection when I am stressed. Neither processing style is inherently wrong, but I have to respect their need for space right now, rather than forcing my need to talk upon them.
So if these emotional skills, the granular self-awareness, the regulation, the mirror neuron empathy, the ability to read the room and validate others, if these are the things that actually dictate the success of our marriages, the depth of our friendships, and the trajectory of our careers, the obvious glaring question is, where do we get this programming in the first place? How early do the vast differences in our emotional toolkits begin to form?
The sources dive deeply into developmental psychology to answer that, and the findings regarding how we unconsciously socialize boys and girls differently from infancy are quite staggering.
It starts so incredibly early. The research indicates that parents, largely completely unconsciously and despite their best intentions, discuss the emotional landscape very differently with their infant and toddler daughters than they do with their sons.
Unconsciously but consistently.
Yes. With young boys, parents tend to frequently discuss anger, the consequences of anger, and perhaps physical bravery. But they largely ignore or downplay other emotional states.
Like sadness or fear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with young girls, parents spend a significantly higher amount of time discussing a much wider, more complex spectrum of emotions: sadness, fear, joy, jealousy, empathy for others.
They are essentially providing girls with a much richer, more nuanced emotional vocabulary from a much younger age. And if we refer back to our discussion on emotional granularity, we know that vocabulary is the primary tool for emotional regulation.
Right.
Because girls are consistently given the precise words for their complex feelings, they generally become much more adept at navigating the social emotional landscape as they grow.
And the sources map out exactly how this divergence plays out on the playground by the time these kids reach late childhood and adolescence. It creates two entirely different, almost alien cultures of conflict resolution.
It really does. When boys play together, developmental psychologists observe that they typically organize themselves in large groups with a very rigid, clear hierarchy.
Who's the leader? Who's the follower?
Exactly. The rules of the game are paramount. If a boy gets hurt or gets upset about a call, the cultural expectation within the group is that he should swallow his feelings, suck it up, and keep playing. Conflict, when it happens, is usually handled through overt, direct physical aggression or direct verbal confrontation, and then it is quickly resolved so the game can continue.
But the research shows girls play in a fundamentally different way.
Girls tend to socialize in smaller, much more intimate groups, usually dyads or triads, where emotional connection, sharing secrets, and cooperation are valued far above hierarchy or winning a game.
The relationship is the game.
Right. If a girl gets hurt while playing, the entire game usually stops, and everyone gathers around to provide comfort and process the emotional event. However, because overt physical aggression is heavily discouraged in female socialization, girls learn to handle their inevitable conflicts through covert, complex emotional tactics.
Like what?
They use ostracization, relational aggression, whispering, and alliance building. They become absolute masters of the subtle emotional knife because they possess the advanced vocabulary and the deep empathy to know exactly what will hurt the other person the most.
So you have these two completely distinct emotional cultures growing up side by side, speaking different emotional languages. And then, as the sources rightly point out, we put them together in adulthood, expect them to get married, and are shocked when they can't magically understand each other's conflict styles.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Which brings us to some of the most fascinating research in the entire deep dive.
Yeah.
The work of Dr. John Gottman.
John Gottman's decades of research at the University of Washington on marriage and divorce prediction is absolutely legendary in the field of psychology.
The Love Labs, right?
Yes, the Love Lab. He built an apartment where couples would stay while their every physiological and verbal reaction was monitored. By observing a couple discussing a point of conflict for just 15 minutes, analyzing their heart rates, sweat production, and microexpressions, Gottman can predict with astonishing, over 90% accuracy, whether that couple will eventually divorce.
Over 90% accuracy. That is wild.
And it all boils down to their emotional intelligence during moments of conflict.
One of the biggest takeaways from Gottman's work is the critical, fundamental difference between a complaint and a personal attack. And I think this is a conversational line that almost all of us cross at some point without even realizing how destructive it is.
Oh, easily. A complaint is highly specific, and it critiques a specific action or behavior. For example, saying, I am really upset that you didn't take out the trash this morning like we agreed. It is bounded. It addresses a solvable problem.
But a personal attack abandons the specific behavior and critiques the fundamental character of the partner. It sounds like, you didn't take out the trash because you are a fundamentally selfish, lazy person who never thinks about anyone but yourself.
Exactly. You have weaponized a domestic complaint into an assassination of their character. And Gottman identifies specific, repeated emotional habits like this that act as literal statistical predictors of divorce. He calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the toxic emotional habits.
The 4 horsemen.
And the absolute most dangerous of these, the single greatest predictor of relationship failure, is contempt.
Contempt, which looks like sneering, sarcastic eye-rolling, mocking, or speaking to your partner with disgust.
Contempt is a statement of absolute superiority. It communicates to your partner, I am fundamentally better than you, and you are disgusting and pathetic to me. And the sources point out something truly incredible and terrifying about contempt. It doesn't just destroy the psychological bond, it destroys physical health. Gottman's lab found that when one partner regularly expresses contempt, the partner on the receiving end is statistically far more likely to suffer from infectious illnesses, frequent colds, the flu, infection.
Wait, really? Someone rolling their eyes at you makes you physically sick. How does that mechanism work?
It comes down to the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Being the chronic target of a partner's contempt places the receiver in a constant low-grade state of fight or flight.
So they're constantly stressed.
Their body is constantly pumping out cortisol to deal with the psychological threat. And chronic elevated cortisol literally suppresses the immune system. It reduces the number of white blood cells available to fight off viruses. The emotional toxicity of contempt is so high that it literally biologically degrades the immune system of the person receiving it.
That is absolutely terrifying. You can literally make your partner sick with your emotional immaturity. And Gottman points out another major predictor of divorce, which is stonewalling.
Yes, stonewalling.
This is when the conflict gets so emotionally overwhelming, the heart rate gets so high that one partner just completely shuts down. They stare blankly, they tune out, and they absolutely refuse to engage or respond. It's the ultimate biological defense mechanism against emotional flooding, but it completely destroys the relationship because it severs all connection.
And it is crucial to recognize that this massive cost of emotional ignorance doesn't just stay neatly confined to our romantic relationships. It follows us directly into the office. The sources discuss a specific workplace archetype that causes massive damage, and I think everyone listening has encountered this person. The brilliant jerk.
Oh, absolutely. This is the manager or executive with a genius-level IQ who perhaps holds key patents, brings in massive sales, or has degrees from elite Ivy League institutions, but who possesses an absolute basement-level EQ.
This is the boss who routinely blows up under stress. They scream at subordinates in open-plan offices. They send terrifying emails. They use public humiliation as a standard management tool.
And the corporate defense mechanism is almost always the same. Well, they're under an immense amount of pressure, and they're a creative genius, so we just have to put up with their volatility.
But the research shows the financial and creative cost to the company is astronomical. As we discussed earlier with the concept of emotional contagion, the brilliant jerk's volatility doesn't just affect them, it infects the entire team.
Right.
The cortisol levels of everyone in the department spike. Psychological safety completely evaporates.
And when psychological safety evaporates, team IQ plummets. People stop sharing innovative, out-of-the-box ideas because they are terrified of being publicly mocked. They stop pointing out critical flaws in projects because they don't want to trigger the boss's rage. The collective intelligence of the entire organization drops significantly because the emotional environment is fundamentally unsafe.
And to tie it back to our earlier definitions, high EQ in leadership isn't about not feeling the stress of a massive quarter-end deadline. The emotionally intelligent leader feels the exact same intense pressure and anxiety as the brilliant jerk.
They just handle it differently.
The difference is the second pillar, regulation. The high EQ leader processes that stress internally. They don't let it leak out onto the team. They absorb the external chaos, regulate their own nervous system, and project clarity and calm to their subordinates.
Which brings us to the ultimate crux of this entire deep dive. If emotional intelligence is the primary, scientifically proven determinant of whether our marriages survive, whether our physical bodies stay healthy, and whether our corporate teams succeed or fail, why is it left entirely to chance?
That is the perfect question to guide us into the final part of our discussion, the future of teaching emotional intelligence.
Right. Given the massive societal and personal costs of low EQ, we're talking about rising rates of depression and severe anxiety in children, catastrophic divorce rates, workplace toxicity, and social isolation. Why aren't we treating EQ with the exact same rigorous urgency as we treat reading, writing, or mathematics in our schools?
The incredibly optimistic news detailed in the sources is that a movement has finally begun to formally, systematically teach EQ in educational settings. We are starting to see programs that integrate emotional literacy directly into the standard daily curriculum, treating it as a core competency rather than a soft skill.
The sources take us inside a place called the Nueva School, where they teach a dedicated curriculum called self-science.
Yeah.
And the way they start their school day is just brilliant in its simplicity and impact. They do an emotional roll call.
Yes. Instead of the teacher calling a name and the student just saying present or here, the students are required to rate their current internal emotional state on a scale from 1 to 10 and share it with the class.
That's amazing.
A 1 might mean they had a terrible morning, they are feeling completely depleted, depressed, or overwhelmed by something happening at home. A 10 means they're energized, joyful, and completely ready to engage.
Think about the mechanics of what that simple exercise achieves. First, it forces the child to actively practice Pillar 1 self-awareness every single morning. They have to pause, check their internal dashboard, and assign a value to it.
Exactly.
But second, and perhaps more importantly, it builds immediate structural empathy in the classroom. If I'm a student and I know that my friend just checked in as a 2 today, I'm going to intuitively treat them with a little more grace. I'm not going to take it personally if they quiet or don't want to play at recess.
It democratizes emotion. It teaches children from a very young age that all emotional states, even the dark ones, are acceptable and normal parts of the human experience, but that accurately identifying them is a shared social responsibility.
The sources also detail a specific, highly practical classroom application that relies on the fascinating research of Dr. Paul Ekman. Ekman is world-renowned for his study of microexpressions and the universal facial cues of emotion.
His work is incredible.
And educators are using his findings to help chronically aggressive kids.
This is one of the most compelling pieces of behavioral intervention I've seen. Research shows that children who are highly, chronically aggressive, the kids who are constantly getting into physical fights on the playground, who assume everyone is out to get them, often suffer from a very specific neurological EQ deficit. They consistently misinterpret neutral facial expressions as hostile ones.
So a classmate could just be looking at them with a completely blank, resting face.
Yeah.
And the aggressive kid's brain registers that neutral data as a direct threat, a sneer, or a challenge to fight.
Exactly. Their amygdala is misfiring, triggering a fight-or-flight response based on faulty data interpretation. So rather than just punishing these kids, the teachers bring in Ekman's specific, detailed photographs of different facial expressions. They explicitly, scientifically teach the children the muscular mechanics of emotion.
Breaking it down physically.
They say, look at this picture. When someone is genuinely angry, their eyebrows pull down and together, their lips thin, their nostrils flare. They train them to accurately, empirically read the faces of their peers.
And what happens?
The results are astounding. Once the aggressive children learn the skills to correctly identify a neutral face, their aggressive, violent incidents drop dramatically. They are no longer fighting phantom threats. They have rewired their brain's threat detection system.
It's literally teaching them how to read the complex social data of the human face accurately. And there's this wonderful real-time story in the sources that puts all of these concepts together into one cohesive lesson. It's the story of the puzzle mask, involving 2 students, Raman and Tucker.
It perfectly illustrates how an emotionally intelligent educator can transform a standard classroom conflict into a profound, lifelong learning moment about conflict resolution.
So Raman and Tucker are working together on a complex group project, and they get into a very tense argument over how to proceed. Things are rapidly escalating, their voices are rising, their body language is getting aggressive. Now, a traditional old-school teacher might just walk over and say, both of you stop arguing right now, get back to work quietly, or you're both going to the principal's office. Total suppression of the conflict.
Which solves the immediate noise problem for the teacher, but teaches the boys absolutely nothing about how to handle their anger.
Right.
But the self-science teacher steps in to actively facilitate the conflict. She notices that in the heat of the argument, Tucker used the word troublemaker to describe Raman.
Right. And the teacher actually stops the action and focuses entirely on the vocabulary being used. She points out to Tucker that using an inflammatory sweeping label like troublemaker is a personal attack. It's exactly what John Gottman described as contempt.
Exactly.
It attacks Raman's character, which automatically puts him on the defensive and makes it biologically impossible for Raman to listen to Tucker's actual complaint. She asks Tucker to pause, think about his underlying frustration, and rephrase his complaint without attacking Raman's fundamental character.
And then, crucially, the teacher turns and validates Raman's feelings. She acknowledges that Raman was feeling frustrated with the project's direction and was actually trying to diffuse the situation in his own way, but that Tucker misinterpreted his actions as being disruptive. The teacher acts as an emotional translator between the 2 boys' differing processing styles.
She literally forces them to practice empathy in real time. And the result, the boys reach a genuine, peaceful resolution. The tension drops. Tucker asks, "Are you still mad?" And Raman says, "No, I feel better now." They feel heard, they feel their emotions were validated, and the conflict dissolves naturally rather than being suppressed.
It's just one micro moment on a random Tuesday, but when you multiply that kind of intentional emotional coaching by thousands of interactions over the course of a childhood, you are structurally building a human being who knows how to navigate the complexities of the world with grace, empathy, and resilience.
It is the complex emotional calculus of being human. And reading that story brought me to this realization. We would never, ever expect a child to magically know how to do algebra without sitting them down and explicitly teaching them the rules, the formulas, and the mechanics of the math.
Never.
Why on earth do we leave the incredibly complex, high-stakes calculus of human emotion entirely to chance? We just throw kids into the world and hope they magically figure out how to process grief, anger, and love. It's actually absurd when you really look at it.
It is a massive failure of our societal and educational priorities. But the empirical evidence is overwhelmingly clear. When we take the time to formally teach these skills, the incidence of violence, teenage depression, and social isolation drops significantly. Emotional intelligence is not a luxury. It is the absolute foundation of a functioning, healthy society.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the prehistoric brain to the modern classroom. Let's synthesize all of this. If you take one central thing away from this deep dive, remind yourself every single day that emotional intelligence is not a fixed, innate trait. You are not magically blessed with it at birth, nor are you doomed to live without it. It is a muscle.
It is a physical, neurological muscle that requires consistent, deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable practice.
Yep.
It requires the daily self-awareness to look inward and check your dashboard, the courage to process your feelings rather than bottling them up, the linguistic granularity to name your internal demons, and the profound empathy to truly read the room and validate the people you care about.
It's not about being the quietest, most passive person in the room. It's about being the most attuned, conscious person in the room. And to close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, a little behavioral challenge to take with you into your day.
Something to test your own internal emotional architecture.
Think about your go-to distractions. We all have them. They are deeply ingrained habits. When you feel a sudden pang of anxiety, a wave of inexplicable sadness, or a sharp spike of frustration, what is the very first automatic thing you do?
Usually reach for a screen.
Right. Do you instantly reach into your pocket for your phone to doom scroll social media? Do you wander into the kitchen and open the fridge even though you aren't hungry? Do you snap sarcastically at whoever happens to be standing closest to you?
We use these automatic behavioral distractions to flee from the physiological discomfort of the negative emotion. We're essentially running away from our own internal weather.
So here is the challenge. What would happen if, just once today, when you feel that uncomfortable emotion begin to rise up in your chest, you didn't run away? What if you didn't grab the phone? What if you just sat perfectly still with that intense discomfort for exactly 60 seconds?
60 seconds can feel like a long time.
It really can. Sit with it. Observe your heart rate. Observe your breathing. Exactly like the samurai calmly observing the drawn sword. And try to give that exact, precise feeling a name. You might just find that the moment you stop running from it and turn around to name it, it loses all its biological power over you.
You might just find a little bit of heaven.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you on the next one.